Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Abu Dhabi Patrons and Collectors Talks for our first panel discussion of 2021. It is my great pleasure to welcome our panelists for this evening, Ed Bonsor, Georgina Adams, and Kenny Shapter, and to welcome you, our audience, for this informal talk on NFTs and their impact on the art market. If you have any questions for the speakers, please feel free to add them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can click on it and then start writing in all of your questions. I'll do my best to keep an eye on it as we go along. And I'll also be sure to check this in about 45 minutes time, which is when we'll open the virtual floor for questions. To begin with, I turn to our first panelist, Ed. Ed has over 20 years experience in the financial sector and is a director of the client team at Cerno Capital, which is based in Mayfair in London. Cerno are a wealth management firm founded in 2007 that focus on serving high net worth clients. I've asked Ed to join us this evening, in particular, given his overview of the financial markets, and he is exploring opportunities in venture capital and supporting the firm in business development. And so obviously all this noise about blockchain and NFTs has popped up on the radar for him, and he's been researching it independently as a result of that. Ed, we're obviously a mixed audience, imagining a neophyte audience with many that don't know much about this. Please tell us, enlighten us, what is all of this about? What do terms such as minting and blockchain and NFTs really mean?
Great, well, thanks, Dyala. Thanks for that introduction, and thank you for asking me to speak at the event. And frankly, I should probably attach a big disclaimer, because I'm not a computer scientist myself, and I'm not obviously in the art world, and nor am I under the age of 40, sadly. So frankly, that makes things quite tricky navigating the world of NFTs and, of course, blockchain. However, I've spent the last 2 decades looking at financial markets, trying to understand some of the big evolving trends in technology. So it's been a voyage of discovery, and I'm sure, like many other people who've looked into it, the deeper you go, the more questions often you end up having. Nonetheless, I will try to kind of give it a sort of high-level perspective. So let's start with some of the key definitions for the discussion. And I'm pretty sure a glossary is normally reserved for the back of a book or a presentation. And frankly, because it's not the most interesting part of the book. But anyway, I'll do my best to try and help some people conceptualize the world of blockchain. And in many ways, as you enter the world, it really is a bit like learning a whole new language, but actually some of the concepts aren't that complicated. So let's, although it's actually on the next slide, but we'll start with digital assets, because I think that's the most important thing to start with. And a digital asset is really kind of any content that can be stored digitally. So it could be photos, it could be Excel worksheets, it could be Word documents or presentations. And more often than not, they don't have a marketable value. They can be copied, they can be stored, they can be sent to others. They're really things we're pretty familiar with in day-to-day life. So let's talk about what are non-fungible tokens. So NFTs are a type of digital asset. So that's an important starting point. So let's take the non-fungible bit first, but essentially it means unique, okay? So a fungible asset would be one that's interchangeable. So that could be like a $10 note. One $10 note is the same as another $10 note, and you can exchange one for the other, or a bar of gold. So an ounce of gold is the same as another ounce of gold, wherever you might find it. So a fungible token might be something like a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. And congratulations to anyone who has got a Bitcoin, but essentially one is essentially interchangeable for another, and hence it's called a cryptocurrency. So if we think of NFTs as uniquely identifiable digital assets, an NFT carries a digital signature that certifies the asset to be one of a kind and therefore not interchangeable. And it's precisely this digital signature that bestows on the digital asset the qualities of it being both rare and scarce. So I'm not going to comment, because I'm not qualified, on the artistic merit of some of the NFTs that have been sold to date, as we've got highly qualified experts here, but I should add that the world of NFTs does extend much more broadly than just the world of art, and really, you should be thinking about gaming, other collectibles, and other forms of media when you talk about NFTs. So, for example, there's been obviously the high-profile sale of Jack Dorsey's first tweet for $2.9 million, and for those sporting enthusiasts out there, you might be aware of the NBA Top Shots, where effectively you can buy a clip of your favorite player and they become tradable. So it's a bit like a baseball card for a collector. And the value, I think, of that market reached as much as $900 million after launch. It's cooled off a bit, but clearly there is a lot of interest and a lot of excitement around the potential of NFTs. So NFTs can be bought and sold on marketplaces, and you will probably be aware of some of them, Rarible and OpenSea, to name a couple. And from the work I've done, we see that these sort of markets or galleries seem to charge fees in the range of sort of 0 to 15%, from the ones that I've been looking at. The key point about NFTs is that they'll exist on the blockchain for as long as that blockchain exists. So think of it like buying a song on iTunes. You'll own that song for as long as iTunes exists, and hopefully that will exist into perpetuity. But the key point here is obviously to talk about the blockchain. And what's a blockchain? So a blockchain is a form of distributed ledger. So think of it really as a database that's secure, it's transparent, it can't be altered or manipulated. It's decentralized and it's secure, where a complete record of every interaction is recorded, and complete strangers can trust each other, despite the absence of an external regulatory authority like a bank or a government. And I was trying to think of kind of an example of a sort of another trustless peer-to-peer network in the real world that perhaps we might think of. In theory, something like TripAdvisor, where the more independent validation you get for a particular venue or hotel, that the better that validation, or the better that meaning, or the more meaning that should have. So that's a sort of one way of perhaps thinking about it. And if we just move on to cryptocurrency, again, I'm sure plenty of people who are listening to this are familiar with cryptocurrencies, but the one that everyone is most familiar with is obviously Bitcoin. And this is an example of a fungible token, i.e., as I said, it's exchangeable. It does have a finite supply, and in this case, there's a limit of 21 million coins. You'll be aware that there are lots of people trying to compete, but for now, Bitcoin is the preeminent cryptocurrency. So just moving on to Ethereum. Ethereum is a blockchain technology. It's a programmable blockchain technology, and the majority of NFTs, unique digital assets, are produced or minted using the Ethereum blockchain. So Ethereum has become, say, the kind of preeminent blockchain about which we should all perhaps learn. There are people trying to compete, but Ethereum is really the dominant technology as of today. So the interesting thing about Ethereum is you can write things called smart contracts, and I won't go into too much detail on this, but these are essentially like real world contracts, but they're digital in nature. So I think one other aspect perhaps to just think about also is gas fees. So when you are operating and using the Ethereum network, you need to pay a gas fee, and that gas fee is really a payment by the users to compensate for the computing energy required to process and validate those transactions on the blockchain. And that's all about that decentralized network, trying to understand that concept. So where we are today in finance, and the big talking point for us in finance, and is probably not of interest to many of you in the art world, but the big talking point is obviously around Bitcoin and its qualities as an alternative asset. So that's touted as a sort of form of digital gold, and the price, as people will know, has gone up pretty exponentially in recent times, although perhaps had a bit of a wobble in the last few days. And one of the reasons we're all talking about Bitcoin is precisely because of what's going on in the financial system today. All of us will be aware that governments are printing and spending money at a rate never seen before, and this means that the supply of money has risen sharply, and savers are being punished for that. And you'll be reading obviously about the stimulus checks being handed out, for example, in America, and there's plenty more money being spent or planned to be spent in the pipeline. So a Bitcoin evangelist would say owning that cryptocurrency protects you from the fall in the value of your savings as supply is much more tightly held. And the size of that market, and I think that's where I come to as come from things as someone with a background in finance, is the size of that market is $2 trillion. And that's pretty big. I mean, the value of Apple in the market today is roughly $2 trillion. So it's comparable. It's got to a size where it's now on people's radar. And certainly we're seeing some institutions start to buy it. And it's important to stress, it's becoming much easier to buy. So Bitcoin at $2 trillion is, so cryptocurrencies today, I should say, at $2 trillion is now becoming a pretty big market. So let's look at the NFT market quickly. And that reached about $250 million in 2020. It's obviously exploded into life with a lot of the high profile sales that we've seen already year to date. I think it was $2 billion transacted in the first 3 months this year. So it's certainly pretty lively. And I think, as typically when a market spikes, when markets spike the way this NFT one has, it's easy to dismiss it as a hype cycle and just another bubble. However, I think it's equally true to think of it as a kind of innovation cycle. And I think, depending on your time frame and your patience and your willingness to learn, I think there are certainly plenty of opportunities to be had in the NFT market. I should just perhaps quickly go on to say perhaps why we wouldn't buy NFTs, and that's not to tell others not to. There's plenty of reasons why you might consider it, but from our perspective as market operators in finance, we think about how prices can perhaps be manipulated. And given the lack of regulatory oversight, in fact, it's completely absent in the market. Clearly, that's a market that is potentially open to some forms of abuse. Also, from investment perspective, they're a liquid, obviously they're one-off items. And that means for us as financial investors, we wouldn't be able to buy and sell with the ease that we like to buy and sell. So it wouldn't work for us. It's also true that NFTs can clearly be stolen, and we've already had examples of art heists in NFT marketplaces. So there's a big security issue there, and the cyber security market, I think, is going to grow pretty exponentially from here as these new types of assets evolve. So obviously at this juncture, things are volatile, they're quite speculative, but I would say with some degree of confidence that a lot of the NFTs that we've seen in the market today may have rather limited value in the future. However, that's not to say that some won't accrue extraordinary value. And obviously for specialists like we have on the panel and elsewhere, it may well be something to scrutinize and watch with interest. I'm sure that we'll see the emergence of a new genre of artists who are extremely collectible. So I'll leave it there, but that's where I come at it from a finance perspective, looking at the size of the market, looking at just how it trades, just how liquid it is, and whether it's something that we would consider. So that's probably where I come from it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ed. A lot of really interesting topics to flesh out there later on in terms of regulation, but also the size of the market and how we're suddenly faced with these crypto investors that have a lot of money to spend, as it were, on digital art. I'm now going to turn to our second panelist this evening, the wonderful journalist and author Georgina Adams. And she's, of course, been a Financial Times contributor and art market editor at large at the art newspaper, where she began her career as a journalist in the late 80s. Georgina lectures at the Sotheby's Institute in London. She's also a member of the International Association of Art Critics and the International Art Market Studies Association. She is also chair of the membership committee of Cromwell Place in London. And Georgina has published 2 important books recently on the art market, which I highly recommend to all of our audience. The first, which came out in 2014, was Big Bucks, The Explosion of the Art Market in the 21st Century. And that is essential reading for anyone looking to understand the mechanics of the market. Her next book, Dark Side of the Boom, in 2017, looks at buying of art as an investment. Also at forgery and fraud and money laundering and all these issues embedded in the art market. And she is currently due a new book this September called The Rise and Rise of the Private Art Museum, which should definitely be on your reading list if it's not already. And it looks at the growth of private art museums globally and the reasons behind this boom. So Georgina, thank you for joining us this evening. And now to the topic of the talk. How are NFTs taking over the art world? Please, can we have your keen eye and opinions on this? What's it about? Why has it hit the headlines in such a major way?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me and for giving me such a lovely introduction. Yeah, NFTs. Now, I probably think that if you go back even 3 months, most people hadn't even heard of NFTs, and they certainly hadn't heard of something called Beeple, who is a designer and artist whose real name is Mike Winkelmann. And Christie's decided to sort of put their toe in the water as far as NFTs, having had a first outing when they actually sold a physical work of art alongside its NFT, and that did extremely well. And so they decided to sell Beeple's Everydays, which is a collage of 5,000 days of artwork. And here you can see it in front of you. As you see, it really looks like more like a mosaic than anything else. And this made $69.3 million, which instantly propelled him firstly onto at least the second or the third, if not the front page of every newspaper in the land. The name of the artist suddenly, and particularly it propelled him. He is now the third most expensive living artist in the world. He just comes in behind Koons and David Hockney. So, I mean, it was amazing. And it was started a sort of complete, almost hysteria about it, that this enormous price had been paid for this NFT. It was actually paid by somebody who went through a pseudonym, who's called Meta Coven, who quite quickly turned out to be an entrepreneur in cryptocurrency. And I think what was particularly interesting about this sale, quite apart from this quite stunning price, was the fact that Christie's, which is obviously over 250 years old, had gone into this very new market, and only 3 of the 33 bidders were known to them, i.e. they suddenly found that they had a whole new cohort of bidders. We'll come back to that later, but it's a very interesting aspect. And NFTs have, apart from that, I mean, this has been touched on already. The point about NFT is that they have enabled a secondary market, a resale market, for something that until now really couldn't be resold because it was tangible. So an artwork which lives on the internet, exists on the internet. The NFT is not actually the artwork. The NFT, which, as Ed very ably explained, sits on a blockchain and is locked into, the ownership is locked into the blockchain and refers back to this work of art, which is sitting on another platform. But obviously, it's a new technology. It's very disruptive. It's extremely interesting because it's suddenly opened the door to a lot of people who perhaps before hadn't been able to get into the art market for one reason or another. And suddenly, you know, there was, you were able to look at this art on your computer. It lived on your computer. But there are some problems, obviously, with any new technology. And I would like, if you could put back that slide, please. I'd like to just point out that some of the images that Beeple put up are, because this is a family program, I haven't put the worst images up. I've put up just some of them. If I could have the next one. They seem to be a bit racist in the everydays. Here's another one, which seems in today's world very, very racist. A fat, nerdy Chinese kid and his imaginary friends. And this one, fancy dancy elite art homos. So there are some problematic aspects to this particular artwork. And in general, there's a lot of work that is sold through NFTs that seems to link back to a world that is quite linked to the gaming world, in fact. And one of the things that we've also noticed, people have noticed, is that the buyers do seem to come from a rather white male gambling world, often, not exclusively, but quite often. This is, it's not as broad perhaps as it could be. I mean, we're presently, thankfully, at last rediscovering women artists of color, and so we're not perhaps seeing that. Now, I think this will evolve. The other problem with NFTs, and this is really quite a real problem, if I could have that last slide that I put up back, is at the moment, the electricity consumption is very high for minting NFT, indeed for minting Bitcoin and the whole cryptocurrencies, because Bitcoin, as it becomes rarer, you need more and more computing power in order to what's called mine them. And as you see here, this is the electricity company. This was an artist who put this up. They made 3 NFTs. They minted, 6 NFTs. And they actually calculated how much energy they used in their studio. And then they, as you can see at the top, the release of the NFTs. So this is another issue which I think will be solved gradually. There's a new blockchain that's going to be much less energy heavy. And in our earlier talk, Kenny pointed out that, of course, with a digital artwork, you're not shipping it around the world. So you're saving electricity in that way. But Kenny, who obviously I know well, and we've often talked about art, has always said to me that he loves rubbing his nose up against art. And so, so there is also this thing of physically wanting to see a physical work of art. So I will stop there and pass off to Kenny, well, to you, Dyala, and then to Kenny, because Kenny has actually made artworks and sold them. So it'll be brilliant to hear from him.
Thank you, Georgina, for taking us through some of those highlights and issues and problematics for the art market. It is now my pleasure to introduce Kenny, who's a curator, writer, professor, artist, and he's, of course, been a vocal proponent of this brave new world. He's certainly championed its possibilities. Kenny has been curating contemporary art exhibitions in museums and galleries for more than 30 years, including in the graduate department of the University of Zurich, where he currently sits on the advisory board. And he also has professorships at the School of Visual Arts in New York and New York University. And he's lectured internationally and contributed to books on Zaha Hadid, Vito Acconci, a favorite of his, I know, and Gerhard Richter, amongst others. Kenny, over to you. From an artist perspective, and also as someone who, as Georgina mentions, loves the very smell of paintings and the sort of bare bones of the materiality of paintings. What's going on here? I mean, I've certainly listened to a few of your talks. You've mentioned that you've reminisced on a period pre-smartphones and JPEGs, when artists would have to send what now seems quite archaic transparencies of their works to galleries to get their work seen. Of course, Instagram's opened the doors, you've mentioned, for artists everywhere in the world to get their work seen. It's been quite democratic in that sense. How did you come into it? And for those unfamiliar with your work as an artist, perhaps we can show your Looney Tunes on screen that you sold on Nifty Gateway. How was that experience for you? We've already had a question from someone in the audience about how do you create an NFT? What's the process? Maybe you could shed light on that and sort of talk us through this. And then finally, one more question just for this general introduction. I believe you're working toward an exhibition on digital art as a curator. And could you tell us some of the themes you'll be touching on for that as well? Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is everything okay? All of this technology talk, and we're still reliant on these systems that break down more than they don't. But there's so much to discuss. I'll try to ram it into 5 minutes. But I mean, as far as rubbing your nose against the painting, at the same time, I've been making digital art for 30 years. So I've been making digital videos using whatever the latest format is in digital filming. I've made animations in the early 90s and displayed them in exhibitions. So I've been in this sphere in the world of digital art for decades. That just mainly shows you how old I am. But in September, which in the crypto world is about BC, equivalent to before Christ, it's the space-time continuum has been reduced to like the speed at which things happen is very volatile and very quick. I found out about NFTs in September, and by a friend who was a digital artist. And as someone who's been making it I didn't quite understand all of the technology behind it. In fact, I didn't understand anything about it. But I did know that as a maker of digital content, it's very difficult to find a commercial dissemination system in which to sell the works. So I've had a small handful of exhibitions over the past 2 or 3 years, and I've managed to sell 3 memory sticks with digital videos. So I don't nostalgically look back to the period before smartphones when you'd have to send around photographic transparencies and slides to convey an image, because as a writer and an artist, nobody ever read my articles because you can only go by going to your, tabletop computer to read them on ArtNet or in a magazine. And we all know that the distribution of magazines remains probably today smaller than it's ever been. Anyway, I found out about NFTs in September. Like I mentioned, I absolutely turned my head sideways like a confused puppy. And then when I heard that Kenny Scharf, who's a friend of mine, a very well-known artist, we also share 9 of the first letters of our name. When I found out that he had actually released some pieces on Nifty Gateway, I asked my friend for an introduction. So I had my first drop on Nifty Gateway. My friend put me in touch with Tommy Kimmelman, who was like the chief financial officer, a curator, a jack of all trades, because the company was so fresh and everybody was doing everything. And the most important aspect of this is that I had no notion about large sums of money. My intent had nothing, all it had to do with was, as a maker of digital art, in a way that's very difficult to convey your work yet sell it, I thought this was potentially a revolutionary, groundbreaking dissemination system, a tool for digital artists or people that work with related technologies to be able to just make their work more accessible in the same way that Instagram has been a democratic wrecking ball in terms of conveying your work to a broad base of people across a wide geographical swath. So anyway, again, like, the money attraction meant nothing to me. I don't have a medium-sized market for my own artwork, because in the art world, you're sort of pigeonholed and reduced to the fact that because I do so many different things all within art, people generally use it as a way to dismiss you. So anyway, I sold 3 pieces in December and I made $4,000. Nifty Gateway operates in dollars rather than ETH. I've never bought cryptocurrency in my life. In fact, a friend of mine sent me 1 ETH to get me started when I started to mint my own NFTs on sites that were mentioned, like OpenSea, Rarible, the ones that don't require curatorial gatekeeping. Anyway, and then I went back to Nifty Gateway and I said, this was fun. I sold some work. And one of the most important parts that hasn't been discussed is that artists get a 10% residual royalty in perpetuity for the resale of their art. So I think, just to cut for 1 second, the most important aspects which make NFTs significant beyond the pale are, number one, the main audience buying them today are investors in cryptocurrency. So you have to imagine these people have made untold tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in profit since Bitcoin came online in 2007, and they pretty much never had anything to spend it on. There's been nothing to buy basically until now. So there's this pent up demand of these people, this universe of investors with a boatloads of money. And now for the first time, they can buy stuff. So that unleashed this kind of meteoric whirlwind of demand. So you have but importantly, these people, not only were they not terribly aware of the art world, I'll call it the traditional art world that Georgina and I come from, these people had no idea about it, and they don't have any interest really in knowing about the top galleries in New York City, Barbara Gladstone or David Cerno. There was no interest there. They're in their digital, and also like Mike Winkleman, who sold this piece for stupid money, he also worked as a designer for his whole career. He had never sold any art. And importantly, the digital community of buyers were not put off by this fact. They welcomed the fact that he had other jobs and did other things. They didn't hold it against him like the art world is so ready to dismiss people and categorize them. The art world is very exclusive and works in this kind of really closed system. And Instagram went a far way to change that. And now also you have, as buyers, young people who are digital natives, and they didn't, like, as someone in my generation, we aspire to have a car for the freedom, the mobility, to get away from your family mainly. And we wanted a car. Kids today, from let's say 15 to 25, most of them barely even have a license yet own a car. They're very comfortable with the notion of digital possessions. So when you sort of, and aside from that, we're still in the midst of one of the worst health crises in 100 years. And it created this perfect storm where we're all pent up, quarantined, locked down in our homes, forging this new relationship with technology and our computers. And I would say COVID was like a 10-year kick in the behind to the universe to assimilate and accept and adopt technology and new systems and methods. So anyway, I went back to Nifty Gateway after I made 4,000, and I was wildly grateful for that. And I said, can I do this again? I could see how this is going to have a large impact on the art world. And they said no. And at that point, Beeple started selling his first NFTs in October. The market was picking up in December, January, and all of a sudden the deluge happened and hundreds of thousands of people all wanted. I mean, it's funny because people say that like the NFT world is markedly different from the art world in as much as there's, you know, and anyone could go to OpenSea or Rarible and upload an NFT. All you need is a wallet, open up a MetaMask wallet. You need to buy just as much ETH as it takes for gas fees. So with $200 in your account, $200 worth of ETH, you can upload anything you want on OpenSea or Rarible. But unless you have some sort of it's really mirrors the art world in very many respects. You have to hustle, and it's very difficult to sell stuff like it is in the art world. Nothing's really changed, except there's a new system to be able to promote your work and expose your work to an entirely different audience of people. Anyway, so I was flatly rejected for the second time around because I made $4,000 probably. And then I wrote a little piece in the art newspaper that came out on the 4th of January. And telephone call.
Whilst we're waiting for Kenny to rejoin us, Georgina, perhaps we have one of our wonderful patrons of the fair, Mohammed Afghami, asking a question in the chat on Bitcoin investors and why were they not spending their money, why were they not in effect selling their Bitcoin for dollars and using fiat currency to buy the works? Why were they using cryptocurrency?
Sorry, technology. I'm on my phone and I get a phone call and then I'm screwed. Excuse my French. Anyway, so then
Kenny, sorry, I was wondering I'm going to interrupt you there on one question, which is when you were talking about the sort of growth in the crypto market and that people were using Bitcoin specifically or Ether to buy artworks. Just a question from the audience. Why, in your view, were people not selling their Bitcoin for dollars, not using fiat currency? Why were they buying with cryptocurrency? Is that something you have a view on?
Yeah, well, yeah. For the most important distinction between Bitcoin and ETH is ETH has the capacity to attach a contract to the token. Bitcoin cannot. So the main difference, you cannot buy NFTs in Bitcoin because the NFT is the smart contract that points you to the visual file and posits a few, the smart contract tells you where the visual file is located, and it states certain parameters as to who's the present owner, who was the previous owner. So provenance is dictated and recorded on the ledger of ETH, which has a smart contract attached to it. Anyway, after I wrote the article in the art newspaper, Georgina was one of the first journalists to flesh it out and to write a piece about NFTs, and she featured my piece and as in her article. And then I called up Nifty Gateway and I said, I've gotten you some legitimate art world press. Could you at least give me the benefit of having another opportunity? But like I said, I wrote in my article on January 4th that NFTs were going to have a profound and tremendous effect on the art world, because you can circumvent the entire gallery system, even though every gallery in the universe will be selling NFTs in 5 minutes, as more and more artists, mainstream artists, begin to utilize the technology. Already Urs Fischer has, Murakami has, Damien Hirst is doing a gigantic project with a new platform coming up. So anyway, I decided that I was going to become this kind of bridge between these two parallel universes, which were the digital art world and the art world. So I began to study, like it was said before in the first statement, about this is a new language. And another important thing is I'm not young, as you could see. I am far from young. I would call it deep into middle age. And there are people making NFTs that are 70 and 80 years old. So this is not just for kids. Be clear about that. Anyway, when I was writing my first article, I have an article that just came out today on ArtNet about an NFT project I did with the critic Jerry Saltz. I'll speed it along. I won't take much more time. And anyway, when Nifty gave me permission to release some more NFTs. Again, my expectations were like $5,000 I would make. I was finishing my first article that night that I had the second release, and I ended up selling 500 NFTs, and I made quite a substantial sum of money, pretty much around like 300% more in 5 minutes than I had made in 30 years in the fine art world. So the story is this. In the end, I'll conclude. In a way, this is a tremendous opportunity for artists in the future. And by the way, if you bought a video by Vito Acconci, a great conceptual artist, in 1969, you would have the same issues of displaying that video that you do with an NFT. So there are dedicated hardware solutions that are being created as I speak. You can just get a TV and put a memory stick inside of it, or they have little devices where you can upload your NFTs to these devices. So this is not a real departure from art 30 years ago or 50 years ago for that matter. But the most important thing is that the similarities of needing gatekeepers, there's so many people making NFTs now. They even have a name for NFTs where you just upload a screenshot or a picture from your camera roll on your telephone. They call it low effort NFTs, because I even made a comment that anyone and their grandmother could be an NFT artist. And then I actually made an NFT out of a picture of my grandmother and sold the poor dear as an NFT. But, look, if you think this is going to be like an easy road to vast riches, you are vastly mistaken, because trust me, I have been basically pleading with Nifty Gateway to get another shot at to release more NFTs with them, and they let me slot in the 18th of May, which would have been 3 months since February 22nd when I did it last. So I mean, there are people that strictly buy from the big sites like Super Rare, Makerspace, and Nifty Gateway, and in a way, they're no different from trying to get your art seen at Larry Gagosian's, one of his 18 galleries. They're very difficult, super competitive, but like I had a friend get me into Nifty Gateway in the beginning, but I applied like everyone else to get into Super Rare, and I got in. But even on Super Rare, I find it difficult to sell. So in the end, it's a new world. This is never, you can't put the ETH out of the ether. It's there. This isn't going anywhere. There's always going to be changes. There's a lot of problems like identity theft and security issues of people breaking into wallets. And already, as Georgina mentioned, I don't know, I think maybe it was before this conversation, but people's work was stolen and replicated already by someone, not with nefarious intentions, just to show that they could hack it. And also, you have to remember that these visual files are being kept on a computer somewhere. They're not even on the blockchain. So if these companies, if the platforms like Nifty Gateway doesn't even let the artist themselves mint the piece, the company does. So if these companies go out of business or consolidate, it's very conceivable in 5 years, you can open your wallet as a collector and see a lot of blank space. But again, like whenever there's large sums of money, there's a Bell's curve of criminality, and the NFT world is going to be no different, where people, some of us are greedy, some of us are immoral. Of course, nobody in this audience is, or anyone on this panel, but there's always going to be bad behavior when there's large sums of money, and there is a lot of money at stake here today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kenny. A lot of things to think about there. Thank you for that. I'm just going to pull out one or two of them. One is that you were talking about Ethereum essentially being blockchain, enabling smart contracts. And what that's really saying is, you know, where these people that are heavily invested in cryptocurrencies are benefiting is they're enabling transactions to happen more efficiently online in digital trade. I think blockchain is something on everyone's mind more widely as something that can transform future industries. You know, this idea of sort of efficient transactions, smart contracts, being able to pay an artist in perpetuity that 10% commission on a work sold. That's going to end up potentially cutting out a lot of middlemen. And I think I would also at this point draw a parallel with, you know, the sort of Medici family in the Renaissance, just going totally off topic here, but into a sort of earlier period in European history, who basically made transactions easier. They invented a lot of tools which are used in modern day banking to make transactions more efficient, easier, to build up their reputation, to build up trust and credibility in their bank. And I think a lot of the crypto investors today that are driving the sales of work like Beeple are really using it as a medium, as a marketing ploy, really, to build up interest, exchange, trust in what the product is. So I'm going to ask Ed to maybe, I mean, and that's something actually one of our guests attending, Amina's also brought up. She says, actually not Amina, she's asked an interesting question about the theft, which we should come back to. But there's an anonymous attendee who said there's theories that the bidder for Beeple was essentially doing this to pump up NFTs and crypto as a platform, that this was really a marketing campaign to sort of encourage trade using crypto. So I'm going to just take a step back from our very sort of art-centered talk and ask Ed to tell us, what are your thoughts on how blockchain and smart contracts will impact future industries? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course. Thanks, Dyala. I think you made a lot of great points there, and I mean, I suppose we all come at blockchain kind of from the world that we've lived in before. So, you know, before I joined Cerno, I spent 2 decades on big noisy dealing rooms at the investment banks, and back then we worked on centralized exchanges. So we traded shares for our clients between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. We spent hours chasing paper trails. So we were chasing anti-money laundering information, know your client information. And we spent days settling the trades. They never settled instantaneously. So to a sort of blockchain purist, that's really an antiquated world. It's almost embarrassing. Their world is 24 hours. So, their markets are open 24 hours. They're decentralized. So all the information around the transactions are held on the network, not on a centralized exchange. You rely on the network for the security of those transactions, and it's decentralized. So no single authority prescribes the rules. In fact, the members of the blockchain can vote on specific changes, but you're not relying on the stock exchange or the broker or the agent or the lawyers to make the transaction happen. So really, as I said, no authority prescribing the rules, no intermediaries, no paper trails. And in fact, paper trails are embarrassing in a blockchain world. They deal in a world of smart contracts, which we've talked about in the context of the art world, but I think are equally and perhaps more equally interesting, but probably going to have a much bigger impact in the world of finance. So really, when you think about smart smart contracts. They're really just computer programs stored on a blockchain. So the rules are coded and there's no middleman required to execute these rules. So that would have many applications in finance. And again, as Dyala has alluded to, it's really about kind of reducing friction, making transactions faster, ideally reducing cost, but also increasing transparency. So you can chase a paper trail very quickly. So obvious examples of where we might see it changing the world. I mean, clearly in sort of borrowing and lending, supply chain management, where you can track down the provenance of something that you're shipping in a global supply chain, mortgage applications, escrow services, basic insurance policies. All these things don't really need an expensive agent or a lawyer in the middle of them. Most of them can be done automatically. And that's really kind of the beauty of the blockchain. And I think we're going to see a lot more noise around that in the coming months, actually. A lot of these things are going from kind of pilot projects into commercialization. So something to watch in finance. And then from an investment perspective, you know, again, coming at as the sort of cold-hearted banker, you know, what are we sort of interested in when we look at blockchain? I think first and foremost, we would think about where blockchain might be disrupting the companies in which we already invest. So, you know, disruption has been a buzzword over the last 10 years. You know, blockchain certainly has the scope to disrupt incumbents. And I think that's something that we need to be mindful of. As I said, anything that's process-driven, simple transactions where we pay expensive lawyers or agents in financial markets, I think those are going to change and become effectively automated and instantaneous and much cheaper. So what we might be looking to invest in, well, we would think about the infrastructure around that system. So that could be in the form of institutions operating around the blockchain. It could be investing in the hardware. So that could be in the kind of processing power of computers or semiconductors. They would be beneficiaries, obviously, of this automation of the financial system. I would say, although everyone can make their own choice on this, that we would be at this juncture quite cautious about investing in cryptocurrencies just to make money. I mean, quite obviously, where private currencies can become a threat to incumbent government-controlled currencies, at that intersection, we're going to have something of a problem. And the US government won't give up the dollar as the world's reserve currency without a fight. So having said that, that brings us on to a world where central banks are going to start to produce digital currencies themselves. And that actually is a whole nother topic for debate, but it's a hot topic in finance right now. So I hope that kind of hasn't confused too many of you, but I think, you know, we're going to see some really big, impactful real world applications of blockchain. And I think it's coming much sooner than most people think. And that's just in finance.
Thank you, Ed. And I'm going to ask Georgina. Kenny alluded to selling his grandmother as an NFT, and that this was not just sort of younger people who were sort of familiar with this language and coming to it from a gaming background. It's certainly true that, you know, galleries, auction houses and fairs are looking towards that next generation of collectors that can help support the arts market, if you will. What's your view on that? Is this a sort of a bubble for the art market? Is it a useful new tool? One person in the audience has asked, you know, there's people thinking about having NFTs linked to actual artworks, not just, or rather physical artworks, not just digital ones. Is that going to be something useful for us? What are your views? Are we just trying to attract new people here? Is it going to work?
Well, there's lots of questions, and I suppose in a way I would say all of the above. Certainly, I think it's really interesting because you at the moment have got a passage of generations going on. You know, what they call the baby boomers are coming towards the end of their lives. And there's a new generation coming up, which has got very different tastes. And it was interesting, I think it was Kenny was saying, young people don't have cars, they use Uber or another sort of a zip car or something like that, possessions, they're interested in experiences. So I think this is, and they are digital natives. Again, Kenny really has said it all in his speech, but these are people who've grown up with the internet, on the internet, they've played games, they've bought a sword, for example, on Minecraft. So they're accustomed to buying things on the internet, which baby boomers perhaps weren't so much. So that's the first thing. You've got this passage of generations, you've got new art, I think, for a new generation. And certainly the traditional art market is very interested because they're going to see this older generation gradually disappear. And so they have to be present for this new generation, which has got very different values and is very interested in different art. And of course, one of the things that's been said enormously about NFTs and this new art for a new generation is that it's also eliminating gatekeepers. Somebody mentioned that, I think it was Kenny as well, is that no longer do you have to get past that black velvet rope outside, a smart gallery. No longer do you have to get on the list. Although, interestingly, when Kenny says he couldn't get onto Nifty Gateway, but if you go onto something like Nifty or OpenSea, there are an enormous number of works of art on offer. And so I think some sort of curation is necessary. And so the very fact that Sotheby's, Christie's, Phillips have all been selling NFTs shows that these gatekeepers are still there. So that's one point I'd make. I think it is in many ways transformational for the art market. But I don't think it means that the art market, the traditional art market, is going to go away anytime soon either. I think that the two will exist in parallel because the art market is nevertheless quite a person-driven thing. Contacts are important. And I just can't see that the whole art market could shift online. So I think you will get both. You will get still the traditional galleries. And don't forget that the physical art market, the traditional art market, is actually very seductive. Once we get to a post-COVID world, which I assume that we will one day, sooner or later, it's a seductive world. It's lovely to go to an artist's studio and actually see them work. It's very fun. It used to be fun to go to a smart auction and see people buying works of art. It's lovely going to an art fair, not only to make discoveries because you wander from booth to booth and you see works of art by an artist you've never heard of, but you also run into people. So I don't think that's going to disappear. So I think some aspects of NFTs is super interesting, particularly the royalties. I think that's fantastic. And it will compensate. I mean, we have already something called artist's resale right in Europe, which doesn't exist in America. So when something is resold by an artist who's either still alive or recently dead, the estate of the artist or the artist himself gets a small royalty. And I think the NFTs are fantastic for that. Locking in ownership of something that is basically intangible is very good, which means that you can trade it. So we create a secondary market. All of that's very good. But there are, I mean, we've evoked them. And one of the things, I think one of the questions you had was about stealing. And this is, the problem is that an artwork, which is anybody can access, which is wonderful. It's very democratizing. You can go look at Beeple's artwork. It's not sitting in a museum. Well, it is actually, it's in a virtual museum, but a physical artwork could be locked up in a free port, but not the case with a digital artwork. But it does mean that if somebody sees an artwork they like online, they can mint an NFT for it and sell it, and they have no ownership. They are not the creator, but they can create it themselves. So that is a danger. And as Kenny said, there's also the danger that the platform that the work lives on could possibly disappear. It's not that likely. It certainly wouldn't happen with one of the big sites. So, but this is a new technology, and these are problems that will gradually be sorted out. The last thing I'd like to say is that there are issues around ownership, moral rights, and that copyright law, intellectual property law, is really struggling to keep up with this brave new world that we all live in of digital. How do you prove ownership of something? What about the artist's moral rights? So it's new, it's interesting. It's, in my opinion, extremely overhyped at the moment at the top level, but not at every level. I think it will, as I said in an article recently, I think it will be a bumpy road ahead. I think we should all fasten our seatbelts, but definitely it has something to contribute to the art world.
And so going back to my little paradigm I like to draw, against the Medicis and Florence, it's just in my mind. They obviously enabled great art that everyone loves. Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli. what's the likelihood of sort of great art coming out through this? I mean, can we view some of these investors that are buying, you know, through Christie's and so on as art patrons, or is this really quite disruptive for the art market because it's sort of done for other reasons?
Who are you asking?
I'm asking you.
Well, I've sort of rather carefully avoided this subject so far, but I think Kenny will agree with me that an awful lot of the art is not that great at the moment. I was on a panel the other day and somebody said, oh, this is the new Leonardo da Vinci. I don't think so, not yet. But it will evolve, and I think we will see better. As Kenny said, there are quite a few seriously established artists who are now making NFT. And so I think all of this it's new, and we will go through a bumpy road, but I think there will be better art. And as Kenny said, video art has been with us for a long time, and nobody denies that there's some great video art out there. Just look at John Confra, his videos, they're fabulous. So,
Agree.
you know, I rest my case.
Well, we have another patron joining us this evening, the wonderful Andrew Wynn, who's asking what, in each of the panelists' perspective, makes a great NFT in terms of its artistic appeal. I mean, maybe Kenny, you could sort of start with that and with what you think needs to be overcome for artists in order to be able to create through these platforms. I mean, what are their obstacles? What would make it a better platform in your view?
First of all, I would just like to come back to a question you asked 2 questions ago. You mentioned someone made a question about the person who paid 70 million for Beeple is invested in other Beeples. Well, let me tell you, that's pretty much how the art world has functioned for hundreds of years. And also artists' relationship with money has been quite close since the Renaissance. So when Miyazawa, who you may have heard, bought a Basquiat painting for 110 million, part of his intention was to promote his company and for self-aggrandizement and marketing purposes. So this is nothing unusual. The motivations, again, like, you know, there's no hard and fast differentiation between the incentives or why people do what they do, whether it's buying an expensive Beeple because they own other Beeples, and they, in fact, the buyer has a fund comprised of, you know, 20 pieces that trades on a decentralized market. So, I mean, hedge funders buy an expensive Jeff Koons, so for the social cachet of having their friends see the works when they come for a dinner party of this. So anyway, it's the human motivations behind patronizing digital work or, you know, expensive traditional works is absolutely the same. Whether, I mean, I'm not going to get into the names, but there's a few families in the traditional art world that amongst them own a wildly disproportionate amount of artworks. I mean, whether it's Warhol's and Basquiat or Picasso. So when people buy the works because they own 300 pieces in their Freeport and then bid them up at auction, and I mean, it's exactly the same. And also about bubbles, I don't even really believe that bubbles exist in the same way that you could say there was a tulip bubble in 1639 when a bubble went for the price of the equivalent of 90,000 euros, which would have bought you a nice mansion. But I think that, is Beeple overvalued? Yeah, I think if it was resold today, it would be lucky to fetch 10 to $15 million because someone, I mean, it's unfathomable that Christie sold a work of art and no one from the staff even had the inclination to comb through the 5,000 individual images and see that there was at least a dozen that were misogynistic and racist. That's outrageous. And the buyer also failed to look. And when someone from ArtNet wrote about it, it was one of my students from NYU that introduced Ben Davis, the writer, to the whole idea that the whole world of NFTs. And then he went and looked at them. And then someone said, like, oh, that criticized, one of these supporters of people said that writer has too much time on his hands. Yeah, he actually looked at the art. So I don't believe bubbles exist. A new market has emerged. Of course, there are pockets of overvaluation where certain assets is what they digital assets or artworks get overpriced, like Grimes, the wife of Elon Musk, sold art for $6 million. That's ridiculous. And it's disgusting that someone would pay 60 million for a digital artist for his first public work ever sold. That's ludicrous. And it never would have happened if Christie's hadn't changed their plan at the last second and decided to not only accept crypto for the purchase price, but for their commission too. So even if the commission alone, which amounted to, whatever, 15% more or less of 70 million, if that commission was bifurcated from the price in crypto, that deal probably never would have happened as it was. So the average price of an NFT went from 4,000 to 1,300, 1,400 in the last 3 weeks or something. And so there's no bubble, there's just something new. And human nature is resistant to change. The art world as we knew it in January I've been a lawyer, I've been on the floor of the stock exchange working, I've been in the fashion business. The art world is by far the most conservative industry out of any business I've ever been exposed to. And they remain working on the same principles as like Lloyd's of London in the 1700s, two usually white guys shaking hands over an expensive Picasso or Monet or Jeff Koons. So these are factors that are, expanding the whole notion of a marketplace. But again, there's a lot of similarities. So NFTs are not going anywhere. There are incredible artworks being made today. When I first dipped my toes in September to December of 2020, in Georgina's article, which was fantastic, I made a comment that the art mostly looked like something you would see painted on the side of a van. But since I have given 2 lectures, one at NYU, one at School of Visual Arts, which is crammed with information on YouTube, you can find it if you're interested. But I have found a plethora of incredibly talented people. Kevin Abash, an artist from Nigeria called Osinachi, Anna Gidler, people that have been pioneers in the sector, women, men, people from all different socioeconomic backgrounds that have been involved from the get-go, that never got involved to make a windfall of money. So really what it necessitates, like anything, is time and energy. Art is a slow burning process, even though we're faced with a kind of redefinition of the space-time continuum in relationship to technology. Some things will always be the same. If you want to learn about great NFTs, there are great, important works being made now. You have to find them. That will never change, like a truffle pig. You have to seek and you'll find. And that's the way it is, and that's the way it'll always be.
Thank you, Kenny, for that. I mean, I would say if it's not a bubble, it's at least a correction. If we look at who bought Beeple, Meta Kovan or Vignesh Sundarasan, who's a programmer in Singapore who has Metapurse. He's the founder of a fund, Metapurse, which states that its goal is to help push the NFT space into an era of consumption, to get exchanges going, to get people consuming crypto. I mean, I think we have to say that is an unusual purchase there. It's not a normal, and that there's going to be a correction. And I'm going to now ask the floor to give us their questions to sort of take that further. I have a question from, let's see, we've got a lot of questions actually. Sorry, everyone. Let's look at, how can we transit into, if someone wants to transition into the crypto art market to buy art, really just a sort of simple take it back to basics question. Assuming they're not, Sundarasan, they're not Justin Sun, the underbidder for the Beeple work at Christie's, who wanted to introduce blockchain to Christie's, through underbidding. Assuming it's not them, how does the average person listening to this talk, if they want to buy art, maybe Ed, could you help us with this idea of a digital wallet? I mean, what do you do if you want to buy anything on sort of blockchain? If you're just an average person that wants to get on there and buy something, what do you need to do?
Well, I should say that that I'm probably not the best person to ask on this, because I made my colleague go out and mint an NFT and buy one on his wallet. But so my world is really more in the sort of cryptocurrency side of things, and some of you may have seen that there was a kind of a big splash made kind of last week with the listing of Coinbase, which is in lots of ways, it doesn't really fulfill the ambitions of the purists in blockchain because it's a centralized exchange. You keep all your assets, well, most people keep their assets on the exchange, which means the security is all held in a centralized institution. So in some ways, that's a kind of deviation from the kind of purist idea, which is, you can buy your asset, you can take it off exchange, and you can hold it in your own cold storage wallet, so it's effectively inaccessible and unhackable. So I guess I'm sorry I can't give a great answer on how to buy NFTs, but I'm sure Georgina and Kenny can do a better job than I can.
No, that's been really helpful. I mean, would either of you add anything to that, Georgina or Kenny, if anyone wanted to buy an NFT?
I've never bought an NFT, so I can't really say, but I think I would know how to do it. I don't think it's very difficult. First of all, you have to find, I mean, when I was writing about Kenny's, I saw it and went and looked at it on Nifty Gateway, and all I would have had to have done, I could have used fiat currency being our usual currency, dollars, whatever, euros, dirhams. I think I probably would have had to convert it into a cryptocurrency and then probably press the button. But Kenny, you have actually probably bought some. I've never bought one.
All you do is open up a MetaMask wallet, which you download. Simple. And then you could buy as little as $500 and start. It doesn't take a lot of, I mean, look, people complain in the traditional art world that art is expensive. All you read about are paintings selling for hundreds of millions of dollars, but I have collected from Instagram the work of fantastic artists for $500 or less even. So it doesn't take much money. You can just buy some. Nifty Gateway is one of the sites. Zora is another one that works in credit card transactions. If you want to go to Rarible or OpenSea that strictly transact in ETH currency, like I said, you get a MetaMask wallet and then you just dip in and buy yourself some crypto, some monopoly money, and off you go. Go to the site and buy it now. It's pretty simple. So I mean, I bought some. I bought one by this amazing artist called Mika Johnson, who used to be a baseball player, a professional athlete, and a few years ago he began exclusively pursuing his artistic ambitions. And he's African American, and he makes a whole body of work relating to socioeconomic issues, and they're fabulous. And I bought one from Nifty Gateway that was in USD, and I bought and sold them on OpenSea and various other platforms in the cryptos.
Kenny, there's one interesting question from Bill Bragan, who runs the performance program at NYU and has put on phenomenal programs over the years there, NYU in Abu Dhabi. And he's asking, can you talk about the presence of performance live art-based NFTs in the market? Are people collecting? Are there limitations around duration? Is that something you're able to shed light on?
Well, right now, I mean, I recently made a short film, which is kind of a micro horror movie based on our foreshortened attention spans that's resulted from too much screen time. I think my record during lockdown was 16 hours and 7 minutes of phone screen time, which, I mean, I write a lot on my phone, and I work a lot on my phone. So anyway, performance, there are limitations in the file sizes. So to release the movie that I made, I have to make a low res file. But again, like when the Beeple file was released, it had an incredibly high level of resolution. So you can zoom in and out and get a perfect reproduction of any of the given tiles of this 5,000 scaled mosaic. So that was on Makerspace. I spoke to some of the other sites. They have limitations of 50 megs. So, I mean, there's a lot of anything that could be any performance that could be videoed could be NFT'd. the problem is you're going to have durational issues and resolution issues. So, I mean, in the best of all worlds, the actual art would be on the blockchain, and that would resolve a lot of issues of thievery and identity theft, but it's too expensive right now. It's too much computing power and takes up too much file space on the blockchain. So there are limitations, but I think, again, like Georgina said, I think the NFT world is going to, at a very accelerated pace, address the environmental concerns and a lot of these other security issues and bandwidth issues.
And I don't know if any of you can answer this. I certainly wouldn't have a clue. To what extent will ETH 2.0 solve many of the concerns around copyright and fraud security? Does that?
Well, it's the long-awaited ETH 2.0. I think a lot of people are hoping that it's going to solve the environmental aspect.
Yes.
The consumption. That's the big thing about it, not to resolve, because the other problems will remain on any blockchain. You know, ownership, all of the things that we discussed, fraud. But the whole point about, but ETH, it's sort of a bit like La Lisienne, those of you who know French, you know, everybody says, oh, she's coming, but she never appears. So we're all waiting for this new Ethereum 2.0 to come.
But I would add that Joe Lubin, who is the founder of MetaMask, he is starting a new platform called Palm, and they're launching with 10,000. Basically, Damien Hirst is all but making his own cryptocurrency to buy a piece of the artist via 10,000 works on paper that his studio has produced. Although he says he made them, I have my thoughts about that, but we won't get into it. But Palm is operating on what's called a side chain. So Joe Lubin was also involved in the origination of ETH, as like 1 million people have claimed credit for. But there are already alternatives like Tezos. There are other cryptos that you can employ. There's an amazing NFT site called Hicentunc, which is Latin for here and now, Hicentunc, and they operate with Tezos. I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly on top of my Long Island accent, but already there are greener and more environmentally sound alternatives to ETH. And Palm is operating on what's called a side chain. So I'm not sure, they haven't released the exact technology, but they're basically creating their own marketplace, which is more conscious of some of the concerns that you've just mentioned.
And Kelly, one last question, because we've actually run over our time, and so we do probably need to sadly wrap this talk up. You know, we've obviously talked about people profiteering from this. We've talked about looking at it from the angle of, you know, sort of, I mean, really, you know, money laundering or sort of trying to raise the value of currency. But there are a lot of people, as you've said in the past, that are actually doing some pretty amazing things with it, that are doing works that use the content to create their work, that question it, that sort of think about environmental issues with it. And you yourself, I understand, have just sold a work for charity with an NFT attached. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I did this project with Jerry Saltz. Like I called it the charity NFT. And I mean, I know many people, like there's another artist who's incredibly brilliant, an artist and a coder called Sarah Friend. And she is involved with education. And there's a lot of people that have donated money for technology education, for equipment in schools. Jerry and I donated money to cancer research. His wife has suffered cancer, the fantastic writer, Roberta Smith. I donated money to the American Foundation for the Prevention of Suicide. I lost one of my children to mental illness, which is something that's stigmatized and rarely discussed. So, I mean, it's funny that the art world immediately, the first thing they do is complain about tax evasion, money laundering, and all of these things, which funny enough used to be the purview of the traditional art world and what people often complained about. So none of this is new. And I think that there's always going to be a bell's curve of humanistic, you know, well-intentioned people. And my life has been absolutely changed since February. My life has been turned upside down. I'm even dreaming about NFTs, for better or worse. And again, like, I had zero intention of doing this to make a windfall. It was just as an artist who uses a certain technology in the creating of my works, this was a way that I could communicate. This is a means of expression and communication and dissemination. So I think that the possibilities are boundless, and the good will far, far, far outweigh any, ill-intended activities, I feel. And also Christie's and Sotheby's, let's be clear, they're also constantly trying to create audiences and grow their client base. They're selling cars in the middle of contemporary art auctions. They're working with galleries to sell art directly online. They're selling all kinds of things. They have a buy it now feature. So the auction houses, smartly, I must say, I have had 2 single owner sales with Sotheby's in a series called The Hoarder, and online sales and the ingenuity and the kind of industriousness. Auction houses used to sit around and wait for people to die or go into debt or get divorced and just sit around and wait for art to appear on their doorstep. We don't live in a world that's static like that anymore. So it's fantastic that the auction houses jump right into this sector, and they're helping. Of course, people that own NFTs want other people to buy them and expand the market. That's normal, the way markets work. There's nothing wrong with that. And since art has come off the wall of caves, it's been coveted in every form. No one will ever not want a painting on their wall. As you can see behind me, I have about 1 million. And this is just something else, an alternative, another way to go.
And thank you, Kenny. And one last question for Ed. We've talked a little bit about gaming and how that's kind of prepared, if you like, the next generation for this idea of trading digital assets. And I mean, Fortnite is a $1.8 billion revenue generator with just in-game assets, and people are quite used to that. So this is more of a personal question, just to sort of wrap up, the talk. Do you feel schools should be equipping that next generation to be familiar with sort of gaming, with technology, with this idea that you trade things on sites? Is it something useful, or is it something that's detrimental for them?
I think it's unavoidable. I think that's the point. We've been locked down in London with our 7-year-old and our 5-year-old, and when everything's closed and we've been to the park 1,000 times, the truth is the iPad comes out too often. And my 7-year-old son certainly likes to play a game called Minecraft and a game called Roblox. And Roblox seems to be a phenomenon right now. And my son comes and taps me on the shoulder and asks if I'll spend, £1 to buy him some Robux. So he's already trading his first digital currency. So, good for him, probably preparing well. But also, it's a social game. And I think that, if we think about people, not just ourselves stuck here in London, but you think about people stuck in cities of 25 million people in China, and you live in a property that's barely affordable, then, you are going to spend more time in a virtual world. And your status in that world will matter to you. So I think, it's easy for us to dismiss the virtual world, say it's unhealthy, say it's something that's unnecessary. But I think the reality is, for most of the world's urban population particularly, and for the next generation, I think the virtual world is very real to them. I think how they project status is very real and very important. And although my son isn't exactly there yet, I do think it would be completely wrong to dismiss this. And I'm sure NFTs are a part of that. And we'll see interoperability where you can take your NFTs or your gaming swords between different universes, between the metaverse, across the metaverse, and it'll be all part of capturing status. So perhaps just kind of leave it with that. But I think this is real. I do think it's here to stay.
I think that is actually a perfect conclusion for our talk today. That's a lot to think about. Thank you for that. So without much further ado, I'm going to thank all of you for sharing your thoughts this evening. It's been enlightening, certainly for me. I'm starting this journey. along with many other people. So thank you all for your time and perspectives. And thank you to everyone who's attended and who's stayed for the end of this talk. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for all your comments. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them. Time has flown this evening. But I wish you all a good evening, and we look forward to seeing you at one of our future talks. Thank you. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.